Thank you everyone for joining in today for our webinar so we can share some information out to you regarding food access for our communities, a win-win partnership for restaurants to help people in need. My name is Rebecca Bykowski. I am a program manager at Sustainable Pittsburgh, and we're really happy to bring you this information. So why this is so important, the disruption to our food system caused by COVID-19 has been felt throughout all communities. Among many challenges being faced is keeping people fed, especially our children. Since the start of the coronavirus outbreak, the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank has seen 5 times the need based on usual output, with demand showing no signs of slowing. With this webinar, we will show you how your restaurant can help feed people in need through the federal Summer Food Service Program and what compensation is available for your restaurant's participation, as a Summer Food Service Program helps to ensure that children have access to nutritious meals and snacks when school isn't in session. And in addition, we'll also be talking about options to help feed adults in need. We will be recording the session and sharing out this recording and the slideshow to all attendees. So just stay tuned for that. Once we wrap this up, we'll get that out in the next couple of days. So, first just an agenda of what we're going to talk through today. So we're going to have Sarah Branskis, Project Manager with the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, and Chris West, Child Nutrition Outreach Supervisor with the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, give us an overview of the Summer Food Service Program. Then we'll have Diane DeBoulis, Nutrition Education and Summer Nutrition Education and Summer Food Service Programs with the PA Department of Education. She'll be talking about waivers and what to expect and some recent changes to the Summer Food Service Program. Then we have also with us Don Mahaney, owner of Scratch Food Beverage, who can speak to this from an insider's perspective about what it's been like to partner with the Summer Food Service Program, his motivation for doing it, and some things he's doing to help feed adults in need. We'll follow all that up with a Q&A session at the end to answer any questions that you might have that arise. If you do have questions that pop up at any time, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. There's a black bar on your screen if you scroll over it, and you'll see a Q&A there. So any questions that come up that you have for Dawn, Diane, Sarah, Chris, or me, go ahead and put them in there and we'll make sure that they get addressed during that Q&A session. So just a quick overview for those of you who might not be familiar with our organization. We are Sustainable Pittsburgh, and our mission is really empowerment. We work a lot to empower decision-making that helps to build a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. We work with hundreds of organizations, universities, local governments, communities, and businesses, all ranging from mom and pop shops to global companies on a wide range of projects to help advance policy, share expertise, and strategically build professional networks that advance collective impact. So many of you on the call today have engaged with us through our Sustainable Pittsburgh Restaurant Program, and similar to that program, we also have another one that is geared towards small retail shops called Sustainable Pittsburgh Shops. So with both of these programs, we have over 165 restaurants and more than 300 small retail shops in the Pittsburgh area that are engaged and earned their sustainable designation. Through these programs, we recognize and champion these businesses for their sustainability commitments and also provide resources to improve, build collaborative networks, and support the overall sustainability of the region. In addition to those 2 programs, we also offer another formal performance program for municipalities. And this is within a statewide partnership with the Pennsylvania Municipal League. And with that program, we have over 100 certified sustainable communities across the state. Over the last 20 years we've been in existence, one of our primary roles is that of a convener. We're also recognized as a resource and a teacher. And today we're happy to be providing you information on how you, as a restaurant, can help to provide food to children and adults in need. We'd like to give many thanks to the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, the PA Department of Ed, and Scratch Food Beverage for sharing this valuable information. And thank you all to thanks to you all for attending today. All right, so Sarah, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you if you'd like to go ahead and start sharing about the Summer Food Service Program and how it can work for restaurants.
Sure. Can you give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me? Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you're safe and well, and thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to go over some of the basics of the summer food service program and just why we're having this conversation. And then I will turn it over to Chris West at the food bank. So if you can advance one slide. Great, thanks. So just a little bit of the why we wanted to talk about this today. I'm sure you're all aware there's just a lot of need generally, but we had sort of identified 3 pieces that we thought could connect in this conversation. What you're looking at on the slide is a food distribution in downtown Pittsburgh by our very own food bank. So we know there are a lot of people in need of food, partly due to the fact that in the past month, I believe 26 million Americans have applied for unemployment. That is, of course, related then to applications for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is also known as food stamps. So there's a lot of need for food right now. This unemployment number is also really closely related to restaurants and the food industry. I think about 40% of those unemployment claims have come from people in food sectors. And then there's also a desire to keep folks working. I know that for a lot of smaller businesses, even to qualify for some of the loans and grants that are out there, a certain amount of staff has to be kept on. So there are all these pieces that are really interconnected and intersect with restaurants specifically. And then sort of the last thing we had been, hearing about and talking about was that a lot of food is already being given out for free, which is so great. And I think it shows the real neighborly spirit of not only Pittsburgh, but sort of generally right now. And we just wanted to see how we could maybe connect the dots so that that food that's being given out can pull from existing funding and maybe be mutually beneficial to both people who get the food and people who are providing it. So I do want to just make a note really quick to say that what we're talking about today with restaurants becoming vendors for the summer food service program is not specific to the pandemic. That is an option for restaurants. It was an option before, and it will be an option after for them to be vendors. But just given the fact that a lot of people are looking towards local partnerships and the high need right now, we thought it was a good time to talk to folks about this. So can you go to the next slide? So just this is sort of again, the basics of the summer food service program. The meals are given to children and teenagers 18 and younger. They're given at sites. That's the actual place where the meal is distributed, which can be schools, parks, community centers, churches. And then there's a piece about low-income areas. This is not something that as a vendor you would have to calculate, but I'll just give some background information on that, which is that open sites in low-income areas, that means that at least half of the children in that area are from families with incomes at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. And those sites would be open to any child. And then there are also enrolled sites, which is like where an activity or program is already happening and meals are provided. And so that would be the children that already attend for that activity or program would be eligible for that meal. Go to the next slide. And then this is just, I myself struggled with the structure of this when I first learned about it. So I wanted to just provide a visual for you all, but the money is from the USDA and then is administered by state agencies. In our case, in Pennsylvania, it's Department of Education. The Department of Education contracts with a sponsor, and then the sponsor is responsible for communicating with and contracting a vendor, and then also their communication with sites. So as a vendor, you would really be communicating heavily with the sponsor, and then there'd also be some level of communication with the site. You don't really have to worry about the top 2 tiers as much, but we'll also get into the details of your role a little bit later on. So yeah, that's sort of the flow of money more than anything, and who you would need to be in contact with. So I'm going to pitch it over to Chris right now, who's going to go into a bit more about the details.
Hi, everybody. Good to be with you today. Chris West with Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank. And I just wanted to go over a little bit of the meal pattern requirements for the summer food program. So if you can go to the next slide, you'll see the specifics aren't as important right now because we can get you all this information. But a couple of general things I wanted to note is that so a lunch or a dinner would have 5 components. So milk, 2 fruits, vegetables, a grain and a bread, and a meat or meat alternative. And you can see on the left and the right there is an example of a cold menu. So 3 ounces of deli turkey on a whole wheat bun, mayonnaise or mustard, half a cup fresh baby carrots, a watermelon slice, and milk. So a hot menu for that day might be a hamburger patty on a whole wheat bun, half a cup of oven fries with ketchup, a 1/4 cup pineapple chunks, and milk. So the nice thing about the requirements is that, they are a little vague, so that really leaves it up to you and the sponsor to come up with a menu that kids will like or fits with what your expertise is or food that you have on hand. So you can see there's examples of what a grain or bread is, meat or meat alternative is, but it's any of those are acceptable. So it is kind of flexible in that way. The part that's not flexible is all the components you have to have. But within that, there is a lot of flexibility. And I'd also note that on there you'll see like 2 ounces or 1 large egg or half a cup. Those are minimums to keep in mind. So, if it was easier for you to do, 3 ounces or 4 ounces instead of 2 ounces, that's fine. So it doesn't have to be 2 ounces. It just has to be at least 2 ounces. So just something to keep in mind there. And the other thing I would say is with cold or hot meals. So we see a lot of right now grab and go sites that are operating under the summer food program because school is not in session. So almost all of those are doing cold meals right now in just kind of a grab and go setting. So some considerations that you would work with the sponsor on is if it's an outdoor site, might be a lot easier to do cold meals. And also thinking about what temperature the food has to be at and what equipment is needed to keep it at that temperature. I will say often we've heard that kids do prefer the hot meals over cold if that is an option. And then something else really important that we'll get to in a minute is variety of the menu. But if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just spend just a second. This is just a breakfast example. So again, the specifics aren't as important right now because we can get you all that information, but a milk, a fruit and vegetable, or a grain and a grain of bread. So 3 components for a breakfast. And then you can see some example menus on either side. So if you want to go to the next slide. So that is like the cutest picture, I have to say, of that. And this is actually, so this is at a site, it was their end of the year party. And that's actually cake all over the kid's face. So not normally a summer food item, cake, but it was just really cute, so I included it. But that actually does show like where a typical, this is a church basement. And that is when summer food is operating in its normal state as a congregate meal program where the kids eat on site. That's a very typical location. So churches, parks, schools, libraries, anywhere where kids gather. So I mentioned variety. So what a lot of vendors will do is a cycle menu. So perhaps it's a 10-day or 11-day cycle menu. So that means that, any given month, a kid will only be eating the same thing, probably twice. So, and the 11-day is often a good one. So it's not the Monday, 2 Mondays later is always the same thing on a Monday to kind of break it up that way. But there are vendors that do less than that. There are vendors that do more than that. So there's no requirement there. It's really just what is going to be good for the kids and what are they going to like. So with the feedback surveys, that's something that we could certainly help with. So even before a site starts, or in the first couple weeks of the site, we've gone in before and done, what the kids think of the meals, what the adults there think of the meals, and get a picture of what's popular, is anything getting wasted, and what they might like to see. So that's just a role that we could play just to help kind of inform future menus of the program. So the next slide. So this is with the reimbursement. So a vendor, and the reimbursement depends on the specific contract that a vendor would work out with a sponsoring organization. And again, I'll give some more examples of that in just a minute. But this is kind of just a typical amount. Could be more, could be less. But depending on the contract, a vendor could receive around $3.25 per lunch or dinner produced. And then the sponsor organization would receive the remaining 84 cents per eligible meal served. So this is for a lunch or dinner. The reimbursement is $4.09 for a vended meal. So, the majority obviously going to the vendor for providing the food. The sponsor does get some of that for, they are the ones keeping track of all the paperwork. They have trained the site. They are monitoring meal counts and what's needed. They connect with the state. And also, an important distinction here is that the sponsor is the one responsible for any leftover meals or meals that aren't eligible to be claimed for reimbursement. So, for example, if a vendor is contracted to provide 100 meals for a site, and they do that, the vendor is getting paid, and everything was fine with the meals, the vendor is getting paid for all 100 meals from the sponsor, no matter if the meals get used or only 50 kids show up that day or whatever. So there is protection for the vendor in there, which is nice on that end. The sponsor is taking on kind of the liability that if only 50 kids showed up, then they would have to determine, do the 50 extra meals get donated somewhere and not claimed for reimbursement from the state? Can they save those meals for the next day and order? Maybe they order less from the vendor for future days, but the sponsor is taking on that liability that if meals aren't claimed for reimbursement, that's on them, not the vendor. So, and just thinking about, our sites, and this factors into the reimbursement and what the contract would be between the vendor and the sponsor. So are sites coming to pick up from you their food, or are you delivering? Because obviously delivering will be more expensive on your end. So that would factor into the reimbursement. And then deciding who's going to provide what. So things like condiments and serving gloves and trash bags and plates and plasticware. So that would factor into the reimbursement as well. So next slide, please. So this is just on the sponsor end, but I wanted to put it in there just so you know what they're looking at. So there's kind of different levels of a sponsor procuring food. So less than 10,000, 10,000, 250,000, and over 250,000. So a very large sponsor, over $250,000 worth of meals, would be, they have to go through a formal bid process, and that takes quite a while, and there's a lot of formality with that. Kind of a medium range sponsor in the $10,000 to $250,000 range does have to get 2 quotes. They don't have to go through a formal bid process, but they would get a quote from you as a vendor and someone else, and then decide between that. And then micro purchases less than 10,000 is just showing that you're purchasing from different people. So the options for a sponsor that's looking how to get food to their sites, there are 3 basic options here. So they could do self-prep. So for example here, Earthen Vessels Outreach is, they're a medium-sized sponsor in kind of the Friendship, Friendship area of town, Garfield. So they make all their own food. They have probably in the 10 to 15 sites range over the summer, and they do all the delivery themselves and everything. So it's all kept in-house. There's also a sponsor-to-sponsor agreement that a sponsor might do. So, for example, the food bank, while we're a really large sponsor, we're over 250,000. So our contract for vended meal service has to go out to bid, and we take the lowest bid and all that. However, if there's another sponsor, such as Heritage Community Initiatives, so they're a sponsor of a site in Braddock, and they're also a vendor for the summer food program. So because they're already a sponsor, we can contract with them without going through the bidding process for doing, and they do a couple of our sites right around Braddock, that Braddock area. And then there's also vended service. So so a sponsor can contract with a vendor to do their meals. So I gave the example, the food bank, we're a really large sponsor. So the vendor for most of our meals is the nutrition group. Another example is Pittsburgh City Parks. They're an even larger sponsor than we are. And so we might have 50 sites this summer. They have 70. So they contract with Pittsburgh Public Schools, and they're the vended service for all of their summer meal sites. So so just looking at that, so again, so a sponsor can do all the food themselves, connect with another sponsor to provide their meals, or go with a vended service. And what we're talking about here is a restaurant being that vended service option. If you go to the next slide.
Hey, Chris, real quick, before we jump over to that, someone was asking, those amounts that you were discussing under the procurement methods, are those amounts per year, per month, or what is the time frame on those?
So I think the better person to answer that will probably be Diane when she speaks. So so I'm going to save that for Diane, so I don't give a wrong answer. But any other questions right now, Rebecca, that came in?
Nope, that's it so far.
Okay. So if we go to the next slide, so there's other requirements that a vendor has to follow. So on one hand, I talked about, you know, the menu, there's a lot of flexibility. On the other hand, there are still plenty of requirements that that a vendor has to follow. So and we, you know, and we're not saying that this is going to be the right situation and the right, you know, that every restaurant should participate in this. Because there are different requirements that have to be followed, and you just have to judge for yourself if you think this is doable. But this could be, in some situations, a good option. So, so the first thing that a vendor would do is register with the state. So they have to be on the list of eligible vendors. And that is just connecting with the PA Department of Education to make that happen. There's another important thing of delivery slips that would go out every day with the food order. So that's things like putting on there what time it left the kitchen. So you can determine how long the food is good for at temperature. It would be things like what the order is, and then the site takes some food temperatures and make sure everything is there. And then they sign off on it. So that's kind of what that delivery slip piece looks like. And then keeping receipts of food and materials purchased for the summer food program. You would want to make sure those receipts were on hand. So if we go to the next slide. So a couple notes here. And then we'll see if there's any question or comments before we move on to the next part of the presentation. So what will this summer look like given the COVID-19 crisis that we're in? Great question. We don't totally know right now. So I mentioned before that that summer food is able to be served right now because schools are closed. So from now, likely until June 30th, if the emergency declaration is kept in place that long, there's kind of summer food looks really different. So the sites are grab and go, so it's not a congregate setting. Meals can be bundled, so you could have one distribution day and give out meals for the week. Parents can pick up meals for their kids. So it looks really different from a normal summer food. And that, like I said, is now likely until June 30th. But there's even opportunity kind of now that if folks were interested in getting started with this right off the bat, if we found the right match with sponsor site, that we could get something started. So after June 30th, we don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, I would say likely we're going to have a grab and go for the summer, but that, you know, it's up in the air, and we don't know what waivers or what waivers are not going to be kept through the summer. So we're still waiting on that, hoping to find out in May what that is going to look like. But the thing that we do know is that summer meals are happening. So we know that. Exactly how that looks like and the mechanics are a little up in the air right now, given the crisis. But I just wanted to end with one other idea to share. And so we've been talking about the summer food program and preparing meals for kids and a reimbursement stream that way. Also preparing low-cost meals for adults. So this is not through the summer food service program, but this could be another revenue stream that you might think of. So if, for example, you were getting $3.25 per meal you produced for the summer food program, you might be able to sell a meal for, you know, $2 or $3 to adults, and that would just be another revenue stream coming in. And even at summer meal locations could be sites where adults would be interested in purchasing low-cost meals for maybe picking up meals for the week or something like that, making it really easy for adults to purchase meals as well. So just wanted to give that as an option. There are places around the country that do this. I don't think we have a lot of examples here locally of folks preparing low-cost meals for adults or kind of at summer meal sites, but that is definitely something that is that does happen across the country. So something to think about as well. So with that, next slide. And I will turn it over to Diane. And I know there was one question for Diane in there, but she has a lot of other great information from the PA Department of Education as well.
Welcome everyone, and thank you, Chris and Sarah. What a great introduction. So not that I don't have anything left to say, but you really set the stage for what I need to describe to people. So our normal is obviously not normal, as we are all in not normal times, but during normal summer meal service, summer meals would start the day after school or school district in the area ended and could run up through the day before school was going to begin in the fall. So what Chris was explaining was our not normal right now is because we are in emergency feeding due to school closures, summer meal programs can pick up where schools no longer can. And schools have to shift to some sort of summer meal service if they want to continue feeding children, and they have. And unfortunately, and I was saying to some of the group before we got started, is my new saying is out of bad comes some good, because we were able to have schools pick up over 2,000 emergency feeding sites in almost 2 to 3 weeks once the schools closed. And that is just phenomenal on their part, that they could switch gears in the midst of lots of question marks and transition to still ensure that children in Pennsylvania were fed. So I just give all those operators, schools, organizations, such credit for moving so quickly when we didn't have many, if any, answers initially in March when schools were closed. So they've settled somewhat into serving, but as Chris was alluding to, now organizations and schools, because we didn't have every school moving in that mode, can truly be serving up through June 30th emergency meals under summer feeding. So I've had so many more emails and calls from our summer food service program sponsoring organizations saying, you know, I didn't know I could do this. Can I jump on now? And the answer is yes. So it's a little unusual that we are talking summer food service in April and May. And it's a little more unusual that in June, schools aren't closing and summer's picking up. So we're continuing that summer meal service from what could be day up through June 30th. And the reason Chris mentioned it and I'm mentioning June 30th is some of the not normal situation are some waivers that have come out from USDA. These are national waivers. I am not going to mention all of them because there are quite a few at this point. But two I am going to mention that means something to those of you that might want to start operation is the non-congregate meal service waiver, which under normal summer, children must eat in a congregate setting. They must come to a site, they must come to a location, they must be given their meal, they must sit and eat their meal. They can walk away with one or at the most 2 items, but 1 item. But normally the meal is eaten in a congregate setting, and that is one of our pretty strict rules and regulations. The non-congregate waiver means children come to a location, or part of the waiver is parents can pick up meals without their children and walk away and take those meals home and eat in a non-congregate setting. So that is a really big change for the summer program operators. The other waiver that I do want to mention is there is an area eligibility waiver. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about where this fits into the programs, but locations must be eligible to serve any child in an open setting. And so we have some areas that aren't eligible. And so they go down a different path, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. But this area eligible waiver allows sites and locations that aren't normally eligible to serve these children to serve them. So those are 2 really big different types of things that are happening in summer that are really not normal to us. And they'll continue up through June 30th or unless the emergency is lifted. But keep in mind, I'm talking about national waivers. So we have a national emergency being declared, and we also have the state emergency that we all know in Pennsylvania come the end of this week and certainly next week, there are going to be some regions that move into a different zone for being able to operate under an emergency setting. We don't think that's going to have a big impact on our programs right now. So we are in an emergency setting. We're operating under some national waivers. But let me go back to some things that were described in the slide that Sarah talked about. So if you could, yes, perfect. This slide is talking about why we've gathered you. Might you want to be a summer food service sponsor, a summer food service site, or a vendor that supplies food to summer food service programs? And these are 3 different things I want you to understand. You could, as a restaurant, become a sponsor. Now, there's a bit of a process to become a new sponsor, and we still are within a time frame to doing that. Could we get you through that process in a week? Probably not. It takes a little bit of time, but we could work you through that process. you become a sponsoring organization of the program. You're in essence considered a self-preparation operation. You're going to be a sponsor. Your restaurant, in the example, would be preparing and serving the food, and you would provide that for your site or site location, which may very well be your restaurant location. So you are a sponsor. You have all the administrative responsibility, all the paperwork, all the training, all the staffing, supplying food, and you receive the reimbursement that Chris mentioned for each meal, each complete meal that is served. If you came on as a sponsor, you need a site location, so you also have a site. At this point, you probably don't bring in a vendor, you yourself are providing those meals. So let's say you can't commit to all that administrative responsibility, but you have a location, you have a restaurant, and you want to use that as the location for providing meals. You could team up with another sponsor and be a site under them, but you can't be just a standalone site. And thirdly, as a vendor who's supplying meals, you can't be a vendor with a site. Sponsors can have sites, vendors cannot have sites. Vendors are strictly a company, or in your case, a restaurant, who's providing meals to other sponsors. Some are food service sponsors. But in a vended case, you are considered a food service management company, a vendor who sells meals. Now, let me backtrack 1 minute. You come on as a sponsor, you are self-prep, providing meals. Chris mentioned this, you can very well sell those meals to another sponsor for their site. In that case, as a sponsor, you would enter into a sponsor-to-sponsor agreement, a very simple agreement. It is not at all what Chris alluded to when you are contracting with a sponsor as only a vendor. So, lots of information. Again, sponsor, you're administratively responsible. You provide food to your sites. A site is simply the location that serves the food. But as a vendor, you are a company that is selling meals. That does require a contract. There are some standard contracts that are required by us as the Department of Education, and you contract with a sponsor. Chris did mention that you must be on the Pennsylvania's list of registered food service management companies. That's a very simple application process, and that would get you on the charts for sponsors who are looking for vendors. So, can you be a sponsor and a site and a vendor? And the answer is no. You cannot be all those things in one combination. You can be a sponsor with sites. You can be a vendor who supplies meals to sponsors for their sites, but you cannot be a sponsor or site and a vendor. You can be a sponsor selling meals to another sponsor. In that case, you're not a vendor, but solely as a vendor who wants to sell meals, you can't be a site and a sponsor also. So I hope that's clear to you. And if it's not, put it into the chat and we will discuss where any confusion is. So as a sponsor and also as a vendor, Chris did a nice job of reviewing meal pattern requirements. Something that is not waived is the requirement to provide, and if you move to the next slide, please, I'll just use that as an example. Something that is not waived is the requirement for meal patterns. So Chris mentioned there are lunch meal patterns, there are breakfast meal patterns. Lunch and supper are the same, breakfast is a little different, and those are required in certain amounts. And as a sponsor, you would be required to ensure that every meal that is distributed has those meal pattern requirements. As the vendor, you would be providing those meal patterns, those components in those certain amounts in a unitized setting. So whether you bag them or box them, all those components, those that were of the meal pattern, have to be unitized and be able to be handed, or in that grab and go fashion, picked up by the child or the parent. So as the sponsor, you will have to ensure that your vendor, if you're using a vendor, or if it's you as self-prep, provide those required components to the child, and you are required to complete a point of service, which in summer is simply a check or a tick off of each meal served and handed out. That is the basis for you to claim meals for reimbursement. And we look at those under normal settings pretty tediously to make sure when we're reviewing you that you've claimed adequately. We observe your meal and we watch that those components are served. We look at your point of service sheet and we compare those to your claims for reimbursement and say, yes, you adequately serve this amount of meals, you've claimed that amount of meals, and as we're reviewing, that's part of our normal review. So even during COVID-19 and emergency meal service, you are required to keep a count of each meal served and use that as your basis for service. So if you're considering being a sponsor, you've got to train your sites how to do that. We make it very simple in summer. It's not like what happens during the school year. It is really that pick off or check off. But those counts, it is critical that those counts are completed appropriately by your sites so that you can collect those and tally those and combine those to submit for your claims for reimbursement. And you as the sponsor receive those claims for reimbursement, not your sites. So you want to be sure that you're able to claim for all the meals that were served. And the other thing that's important, and Chris, you mentioned this, is if a sponsor contracts with a vendor, the burden is on them to forecast and predict and maintain a relationship with that vendor and the site so that they can see, I've ordered 100 meals, but routinely every day, I'm only serving 50. I need to manage that with my vendor, and I need to keep that communication open with my site so that I am not paying for meals that I, in the end, cannot use. Because your vendor is entitled to payment for the meals you ordered. So there's a lot of management here as the sponsor that you need to be aware of if you want to go down that path. Chris, you also did a nice job of explaining, and this is not a normal, this is something that's part of one of the waivers, is normally one meal at a time. You serve breakfast, you serve lunch. You serve lunch and a snack. Those are done one at a time, served one at a time. But during COVID-19, one of the waivers allows us to serve up to 2 meals per day and bundle up to 5 meals per week. So for purposes of distancing and decreasing contact, we have many sponsors that are saying, I can manage to serve 2 meals a day and 3 meals per week. I do it in a grab and go fashion. I put them on a table or in a box, and the sponsor or the parent, the parent or the child picks those up, because maintaining the distancing is one of the things we have to make sure we're aware of as people are distributing meals. So 2 meals per day can be served at once, and up to 5 meals per week at one time can be bundled.
And I do want to just jump in and say we can provide some of these details of this, you know, if, because I know this is a lot of information.
It is a lot.
We can, like, if this is something that if you're interested in moving forward as a vendor or sponsor something, this is all information that can be provided too.
But the reason I'm going through it, even though I do realize it's a lot, and trust me, there's a lot more in the training and information that needs to come out to you, is so you understand there are still processes in place that we have, as a state agency, the responsibility to make sure you, as a sponsor or a site or a vendor, are following. Those have not been lifted or waived. So, just to sum it up, anyone who would be interested in becoming a sponsor, there is that new sponsor process, and you could contact me directly. Anyone who is interested in a vendor, there is a registration process that you need to complete, and you could contact me directly. And I can either provide you with those documents or put you in touch with who can assist you with completing those. Once you decide where you want to fall, specific questions can be directed to me and my team. We will answer those for you and guide you in the direction you are wanting to, or the path you're wanting to follow. So there was one question that came up, Chris, when you were speaking, and that was the amounts that you were quoting about purchases. Was that per year or per month? And that was annually. That was per year. At this point, I think there's another question in the chat. I'm not sure. No, that was the earlier one. So if there are questions, please enter them into the chat and I will be happy to answer them now. My email address was available, and so you can certainly email me and let me know what you might need or what questions you have. And I really thank you for your interest in this.
So much, Diane. And I do have this slide up there with Diane's contact information on it in case anybody needs to ask her any questions. Now I'm going to advance through some slides here and hop over. We're going to now hear from Don Mahaney, owner at Scratch Food Beverage, who's going to share with us a bit about his experience participating with the summer food service program and what he's been doing to try to help feed some people in need, how he things like that. So Don, go ahead and jump in. Thank you so much for taking some time today to help provide some guidance too.
Yeah, great. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Hello? You can? Okay, good.
Yep, we hear you.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I had to be away a little bit there. I lost some signal on my phone. What is it exactly you'd like to know, Rebecca?
Well, I think we were looking, to learn more about, what was your motivation for partnering with the program, how you got started, how it was working for you, if you had any challenges or obstacles. I know in some ways this seems like a complicated process, so maybe if you could give some pointers on,
Sure. Yeah.
on how you got started, because I think there was a question that came in that there was concern that it felt like it might be for bigger restaurants, and she's looking to know as a smaller restaurant how she could help on a different level, and I think you could kind of speak to that too.
Sure. Thanks for clarifying. I think that the first thing that struck me when it became apparent that we weren't going to function as a full-service restaurant any longer, and for those of you that don't know, my place, Scratch Food and Beverage in Troy Hill, would seat at capacity 83 people at a go. So, we would see on a Friday or a Saturday night if and, the bulk of our square footage was dedicated to people being able to sit down and have dinner or sit at the bar. And that isn't the case any longer. That square footage isn't something that can be utilized in that way and probably won't be for some time. So we needed to think about what we could do to be, useful and collaborative partners in the community, even if we weren't able to operate as originally intended. And that meant, how do we repurpose that square footage? And luckily, just by asking questions and finding out what other people were doing in the community, I came to talk with Chris West, and I came in contact with Brooks Broadhurst and the program that he was putting together with PNC and Pittsburgh Public Schools, and that was just an amazing sort of logistical haul that they pulled off there with Eaton Park to do that as quickly as they did and then to have the reach that they do. But there's gaps that remain, to that person's question, and small restaurants are pretty well positioned to fit those gaps. So we looked at our dining room and said, okay, we can't use it for seating anymore, so we're going to use it for plating, and just, you know, butted all the tables together and have these like 2 rows of tables that we're able to put some meals together on for the programs that we're feeding with now. And we're hoping to pull on some more. You know, I think that because we're also in a situation where we can't operate our kitchen fully staffed any longer, and safely anyhow. So, you know, we have to practice social distancing within the workplace as well. And that means that, you know, we have a greater number of hours in the day that we're able to potentially operate to hit what might be true capacity. I don't know what exactly that's going to mean. I think storage is probably going to be our biggest difficulty to overcome. But, you know, I think it's just about trying to reimagine how you use your cooler space and how you use dry storage and how you use your kitchen space in your dining room. I hope that answers some of your question.
It might be, yeah, I think that definitely where smaller restaurants fit in. Sorry, this is Sarah from the PFPC. I don't know if it looks like you're on the phone, so you can't see us, but I wonder if you also, so can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the sponsor that you partnered with and the sites where your food is distributed?
So we have not been signed on as a vendor officially just yet. We're working through that process with the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank and a church on the north side of Pittsburgh. Our efforts to date in terms of the summer fruit program have been exclusively as like a sub vendor with Eaton Park Hospitality Group. So we're providing foods at the Spring Hill Elementary School and Perry Traditional Academy, and we bill back to Eaton Park to date, and they, you know, we bill them for that service. But we're going to be signed on as
That sounds like you're cutting out a bit, Dawn.
you know, through. I'm sorry about that. It was a thing that I decided a couple of days ago that I needed to get into the woods for a night. So I'm on my way to a campsite right now. But yeah, I hope in a couple of days time we'll be a vendor of record with a sponsor site on the north side and be able to do that pretty well.
Can you talk about like the process that you did to, I know you said you're working through the final steps to become a vendor, but what was the process like for you to do that? Was it something onerous? Was it pretty easy to do? Can you kind of talk about those steps a little bit?
Yeah, well, actually, one of the great things about the beginning of this call was outlining, you know, how you get the money back to the source, back to the USDA through the state, and then to the sponsor sites, and ultimately a split to the vendor too. I, you know, had conversation with Chris West at the at the food bank, and he had identified the needs, so that homework was already done. And the sponsor sites, he did a lot of work pulling them together, and you know, a lot of it was collaborative. You know, I put my resources at their disposal, and the sponsor site worked with me in developing the menu and making sure that we were going to be able to put together a decent proposal.
Okay, great. Sorry, Sarah, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it looks like there are a couple questions in the chat, and I think they are both directed at Dawn, so I was just going to relay them. Dawn, one of them is, how long is the process from initial application? Well, I guess this actually might be a question for everyone. How long is the process from initial application to giving out the meals? And I guess it doesn't specify if application would be like becoming a vendor or becoming a sponsor, so those might be two different answers.
Well, I can speak to the vendor question. The application itself, concentrating.
We just lost you.
You know.
FYI.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so the vendor application process is maybe 5 minutes at most. You're really just pulling some together.
Maybe if Diane or Chris, if one of you wants to tackle this while we figure out audio for Dawn.
Okay, I'll pick up on that. So I think what I heard him say is it takes 5 minutes for the vendor process, and really the registration form is very simple. It's about your company and some general information. that allows us to put you on the approved list. So that is very simple and not very time consuming. To come on as a sponsor does take some time. There are some very specific requirements that USDA and the state of Pennsylvania need to verify. And normally it takes a few weeks. Even in pushing right now in the situation we're in, it takes, under normal, it's quite a few weeks. Now it's a few weeks. So we can only push so far because there's some other pieces in Pennsylvania that people need to go to register, like to get a vendor number for the state of Pennsylvania. That's out of our hands, very quick. But again, it's a part of the process. So it does take a few weeks to come on as a sponsor.
And I did just want to, just real quickly, the Apollo Cafe had a question that this is if the right situation is found, absolutely for smaller restaurants. You know, if you might be working with just one site, for example, and maybe that site gets 25 kids a day, you know, and that could be perfect for a small restaurant helping out that site. So it's just finding the situation of a sponsor looking to contract with a vendor and that site being needed. And I do know in a lot of areas we are looking for that very local, you know, trying to make it happen. So you know, we might be able to find a match like that.
Absolutely. And even though this is a downtime for restaurants looking to utilize their space differently, when you're back up and running, this isn't something that you would want to just toss out, because it is yet another avenue for you. And you have the control over, as Chris was trying to say, maybe you only want to take on one sponsor with a site that has 25 children. But given your ability and your space and everything else that goes into your restaurant, you might say, no, I can tackle 2 of those. No, I can tackle 5 of those. It really is something you can make the decision on, you know, when we progress back to our new normal. So just keep that in mind for the future too.
Like this last question maybe was for Don, but how many lunches is he providing or expected to provide and how often? Which maybe you both just addressed a little bit. There's a really huge range of what's possible depending on the sponsor and the site. But if you want to elaborate on that, or if I know we're at time, so I don't know if we should do like a next steps wrap up, Rebecca, or
I mean, if there's anything additional to add, but I mean, I think it sounds like it just kind of varies by sponsor and site, and you know, and what the restaurant is willing and able to provide to. Chris and Diane, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think, you know, it can be flexible and vary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there is, I know we're at time, but there is something in the chat. So farm to table, buy local with Aaron Hart. So this is an example of what I was just talking about with the Apollo Cafe. So they're becoming a sponsor. They're in that process. And they are going to be looking to work with neighborhood restaurants to provide meals for Allegheny County Housing Authority sites. So that's an example where they might have a contract with a restaurant for one site, and that be like a local neighborhood restaurant. So just wanted to throw out there. Sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
That's all good. And Aaron, let me know, you know, anything we can do to help facilitate on that end too. Okay, so we're gonna wrap things up here, but just couple things. Contact information for interested restaurants or next steps. So I've got Sarah, Chris's, and my contact information there. Diane's was on a previous slide. Outside of Dawn, Jen Saffron, the chef and owner at Sprezzatura, is also participating in this program. And she also offered out for any restaurants who are interested or have any questions specific to what it might look like from a vendor perspective, to feel free to reach out to her. So her contact information is also listed there. In addition, we also have a form that you can complete. It's just pretty basic, takes just like a minute of your time. If you're interested to learn more information or sign up for participation, the link is there in the slideshow, and Meredith also put it up in the chat box. In addition, we'll be sharing that link in the email that will follow up with this information that will include the recording and the slideshow as well. So thank you all for your participation and your time today. Thanks, Chris, Sarah, Meredith, Diane, Dawn, everyone and all the participants for being here today and coming together to build community to create some great change together. So thank you all so much, and you have a great afternoon. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.